As a person from a farming background in Gippsland, I'm concerned that the gas-led recovery means that vast areas of prime farming country will be impacted by gas extraction. This puts at risk the premium price we get paid for our produce because it will no longer be seen as clean and green. Why is the main thing suggested so far a gas-led recovery? And wasn't this a foregone conclusion given that the Prime Minister stacked his COVID Commission with gas and fossil fuel industry operatives?
Ray Johnston.
Good question, Daniel. That's my question as well. Look, I do have some concerns when it comes to gas being touted as the way out of this, for Australia's economic recovery. The solution does raise more questions than answers for me. Why have we chosen an industry that employs less than 0.2% of the workforce, pre-COVID, rather than one of the industries that employs lots of people? Why are we choosing to support an industry that raises questions in regards to its environmental impact? And there was some wording that came out of that recommendation that really concerned me, which was cutting the red and green tape. And I'd love some clarification as to what cutting the red and green tape actually means. Does that...
You're talking about this report that was commissioned as part of the COVID Commission process, which is not policy yet by any stretch.
But it's advice, and you would assume that if people have been brought together for advice that they're going to be listened to. You'd hope so at the least. But does cutting red and green tape mean no environmental impact statements? Does it mean that we're not looking at the impact on groundwater, which we still know so little about, which is so crucial to Australia? Water is such a precious resource. And does cutting that red and green tape extend to having conversations with traditional owners and native title claims? This is questions that aren't really raised with other industries that we could be supporting. And I'm interested because I know, Alan Finkel, you have some strong positive feelings about gas in regards to bridging that gap between renewables and what Australia requires. But what is it about gas that we're getting that outweighs all of these negatives that we couldn't potentially get from battery storage, which can pay for itself within 2 years?
So the answer to your question is that it's all about scale and speed. It's not about, in my opinion, about building the gas industry for the sake of the gas industry. It's gas as an enabler. What I've been talking about consistently is moving towards what I call an electric planet, a society where all of our energy needs come from clean electricity. The quicker we can get there, the better. Now, I think that if we just try to bring on a lot of solar and a lot of wind electricity and hydroelectricity, but solar and wind in particular, and rely only on battery storage to give it its firming, to make sure that we can dispatch energy when we need it, there will be a limited rate, given the availability and cost of batteries, there will be a limited rate at how fast we can develop solar and wind. But gas has much, much more scale than batteries. And gas is effectively the perfect complement to solar and wind. We can build a lot of solar and a lot of wind and use gas for the times when we don't have the sunshine and the wind blowing, to deliver the energy that we need. We can bring on vastly more renewable electricity if we can support it. And in the short term, the easiest way to support it is with gas. Maybe 20 or 30 years from now, we'll have new kinds of batteries, vastly powerful, more extensive batteries, and we can do it with batteries. But gosh, the quickest way to develop our renewable electricity system is to support it with gas.
And so when you say short term, what exactly do you mean? Because we now have reports of proposals to build a gas pipeline from Western Australia to the east to deliver some of these resources. I mean, that would take a lot of time and would need to service for a fairly long period of time to make it worthwhile. How long do you think we should be relying on gas for as this transitional energy?
The reality is we're going to need to rely on it for 10, 20, perhaps 30 years. Transforming an energy system at a national scale or at a global scale is extraordinarily difficult and consistently underestimated by people. We're talking about the proverbial supertanker that has so much inertia that you can't turn it quickly. So, Hamish, my specific answer would be 1 to up to 3 decades.
Lucy Turnbull?
Well, I find that a little bit troubling because I think we have to have a national and a global goal of having net zero carbon by 2050 at the latest, ideally 2040. And the way to get there is have renewables plus storage. Now, storage is not just batteries, you can have pumped hydro, and the battery technology revolution is really amongst us. I think if we overinvest in gas, and we think about it for the next 10, 20, 30 years, that's about the same as building a power station with a somewhat lower emissions profile, but not a zero emissions profile. And we have to, reconceive our world in the post-COVID world as a post-carbon world. And we do that by not just doing the transitional stuff, do that to the bare minimum you need, but actually to look forward. And that's the opportunity we have now to the post-carbon world.
Alan Finkel, you chair the Technology Investment Roadmap Ministerial Reference Group that's working with Angus Taylor, the Energy Minister, looking at all the different options as far as technologies are concerned for Australia's energy future. But it seems you and many members of the government are already convinced that gas is the way forward. Have you already reached a conclusion on this?
No, the answer is no. I was giving you my personal opinion based on a few years of looking at this. But what we're doing in the low emissions technology roadmap is a consultation process. We've started off with a large suite of possible technologies. We're looking at them through consultation with the broader community to choose those or to identify those that have the largest scale potential for abatement, to reduce emissions, the largest economic opportunity, and also those that will build on Australia's comparative advantages. So no, nothing is foregone. I was responding to a specific question. Let me also point out that...
Can I just be clear for our audience, though, watching tonight? I mean, it is not just you. The Prime Minister told the National Press Club in January that gas has a critical role to play. Nev Power, who heads the Commission, is talking about the options to connect our major demand centres with our major supply centres in terms of gas. Angus Taylor, on April 23rd, has been talking about a gas-fired recovery. And as I mentioned, you told the National Press Club in February, in the short term, natural gas will play that critical role. I mean, at a very senior level, there's a lot of consistency here about the role of gas.
But it is a role that will help us to get to low emissions more quickly. It's not fair to say, look, gas is half or a bit less than the emissions from coal, because when it's in a support role for solar and wind, it's got the other advantage of being able to ramp up and ramp down very quickly. So you don't have to use it as much as you would coal. Coal doesn't ramp up or ramp down quickly, so you've got to keep the coal-fired electricity going, even when you've got plenty of solar and electricity and wind electricity. You don't use the gas as much. It's there to support the system. So it's got advantages. And another thing that's worth considering is that, yes, it might be a 10 or 20 or up to 30-year transition, but as we develop our ability to produce clean hydrogen, those gas turbines can be repurposed to run not on natural gas, but on the clean hydrogen. So there's actually a transition pathway to utilising that investment, also for firming the electricity system, but using hydrogen that you've produced from clean electricity to give you the energy when you need it.
So I did want to ask you about that, because when you talk about Australia potentially exporting renewable energy in the future, you talk about a hydrogen future, also the possibility of Australia getting into green steel using hydrogen. Are you talking about doing this using renewable sources or using fossil fuels?
Look, I'm primarily talking about using renewable sources, and that's a combination of solar, wind and hydroelectricity. And we're very fortunate that in Australia, not only do we have the largest landmass with intense solar irradiation, but many of the sites have coincident wind energy as well. Or in Tasmania, you've got coincident wind energy and hydroelectricity. And when you've got two going for you, you can get a more consistent, steady output, which makes the economics of making the hydrogen more effective. We can build up that renewable electricity-driven hydrogen industry from today incrementally. There is a separate pathway that you referred to, and that is to make hydrogen from either coal or natural gas. And people all around the world are talking about doing it.
I need to bring in Lucy Turnbull because she's shaking her head furiously here.
Okay.
Well, I think it would be a huge opportunity if we if we didn't go straight to green hydrogen, Alan. I know you're very passionate about it, so I'm a little bit surprised that you're suddenly saying, oh yes, let's build coal hydrogen and gas hydrogen. You can do it, but how sustainable is it? What will the time horizon for any investment be if we're going to a zero carbon world? It might only have a 10 or 15 year time horizon. So who's going to invest in that? And if the public has to invest in that through the government investment decisions, and it's got a very short time horizon for return, it could be a wasted, stranded asset and a waste of money very quickly. It could actually be a stranded asset if you're going to build pipelines all over the countryside and stuff. It may not be the case, but I think you have to build a very clear argument for why it's a sensible idea to be doing this massive investment in gas if there are other pathways to get to a lower emission standard.
Lucy, if we're talking about building a hydrogen industry, it's only worth doing and we'll only have customers if it's clean hydrogen.
Yeah.
So if it comes from, say, coal, as is being contemplated, but not committed to, but contemplated in the Latrobe Valley, that will only get up as a project if the developers can show that they can do that without emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, or such a trivial amount that the net benefit is huge. Now, I don't know whether that's possible. There's a lot of reason to think that it is plausible, but the commercial study hasn't been done and probably won't be done for another 3 or 4 years. But if they can justify the project on cost, and if they can permanently bury the carbon dioxide and do it in a provable way, then you're producing clean hydrogen. The hydrogen itself is a molecule. You can't tell by looking at the hydrogen whether it came from a solar source or from a natural gas source. But you can, through the carbon dioxide accounting, tell whether there was carbon dioxide emitted in the production of that hydrogen. And that's what's important.
So,
the goal is not to emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
OK, well, I think our goal should be, if we're going to be aspirational and visionary about the future after this crisis, is to have the goal of having the emissions profile and aspirations of, say, Denmark with the energy costs of Saudi Arabia. So if you have that goal, then what is your pathway to get there? Okay. And it probably isn't gas.